Welcome to Psych Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Jessica Rabin, a licensed clinical psychologist. If you are a mental health professional, student in the social science field, or just interested in psychology and mental health, this podcast is for you. Although topics discussed on this podcast are similar to therapy, Psych Talk is not a replacement for therapy and is for educational and entertainment purposes only. So let's dive into today's episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to Psych Talk, and thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Today I have a very special guest with me on the podcast for the second time, Dr. Rachel Goldman, who is a licensed psychologist, speaker, consultant, and author. So, Dr. Rachel, thank you so much for coming back on Psych Talk and being here today.
Of course, thank you so much for having me. As we were just saying, I'm thrilled and honored that you had me back. So thank you.
And for those of you who may have not listened to Dr. Rachel's episode, she was back on the podcast in April of 2023. It was episode 131 on stress management and being good enough. So go back and listen to that episode after you listen to this one. But we're going to talk about some of the same things, some different things. But before we jump into our discussion, can you introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, what you do for anyone that is not familiar with you and your work?
Sure. Thank you so much. So I'm a clinical psychologist in New York City. I'm also a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. And I do a lot of speaking engagements. And most recently, I can, I guess, officially call myself now an author. I wrote a book that is coming out, I guess, any day now,
Yep.
which is really exciting. And I specialize in, stress management, helping people build a toolbox. I like to call it a coping toolbox to help them manage stress and get through life when life happens. And actually, my academic and research background is also in the treatment of obesity and working with individuals with disordered eating behaviors and body image as well. And then, as I'm introducing myself, I always say I wouldn't be really telling the complete truth if I left out the fact that I'm also a mom. So
Mhm.
I have two, I guess one is not so young anymore, but a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. So I always like to add that as well.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. As a mom and psychologist myself, it is very important to include all aspects of our identity when we're
Exactly.
introducing ourselves.
Yeah. So thank you.
Of course. And so, as you just said, your book, When Life Happens, The Mindset Shift You Need to Manage Stress, Build Confidence, and Break Free, is coming out the week that this episode is dropping. So, can you tell us a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write it?
Sure, yeah. So it's funny, in grad school, I feel like I had this thought that like maybe I'll write a book one day. And now, after years of clinical experience, I've realized, and something I often say is that a goal without a plan is just a wish. So I
Mhm.
think back and I'm like, that was just a wish. It was not a goal. It
Yeah.
sounded good at the time, and I like had no plan of actually doing it. And then the pandemic happened and
Mhm.
I started thinking about it. And well, I guess even before then, I worked at Bellevue Hospital for about 5.5 years, seeing a lot of
Mhm.
clients and patients. And I had this thought one day, and it's actually in the introduction of my book, but I had this thought that day after day, client after client, I would realize that clients would have these little aha moments in my office. And I was like, wow, like that seems like a simple thing that I said,
Mhm.
but it really meant so much and it really clicked. And if it clicked for that one person, time after time, door after door, patient after
Mhm.
patient, like I was like, I really want to get these messages out to more people. So I remember saying, I wish I could put my messages on a billboard. And
Mhm.
then Instagram happened.
Yep.
And I was like, well, that's my billboard. And then the pandemic happened. And then people kept saying, is there a book you recommend? And there's always books that I do recommend, but I
Mhm.
didn't feel confident about sharing just one book. And I was like, I think I need to get my messages in that book. So this book is that. I joke it is my
Mhm.
brain unloaded on paper. I live, breathe, eat CBT. And the purpose of this book, I really wanted to make CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, more accessible. And
Mhm.
I always say it is not. a replacement for therapy at all, but I want to make the skills, the tools more accessible. And that's really why I wrote this book. And then also, as I am a woman, I guess you could say I'm going through perimenopause. And as we're all kind of going through different phases of our life, I've also realized personally, but also professionally with my clients, that what people have been doing their whole life all of a sudden may not be working anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the phase of life you're in.
Yeah.
And I kept hearing also people saying, I feel stuck, I feel overwhelmed, and really getting stuck in those thinking traps. And that's a lot of this book as well, kind of identifying those unhelpful thoughts and helping people get unstuck to be able to move forward. Because I
Mm-hmm.
truly do believe that all it takes is a mindset shift, which I'm not minimizing because that's hard, but it takes a mindset shift or small tweaks in order to do it. And I
Mm-hmm.
really want more people to realize that they don't need to just have a complete overhaul or they don't need to like completely change their life in order to start seeing these benefits. So I know that was a long answer.
No, I
But
love it. Yeah, I love that last part that you said. I'll start there and move backwards in my thinking, about the small tweaks and the shifts, because I do think a lot of people, especially those that, have access to therapy and sit across from a licensed mental health professional are like, I need so many things to change, or, the magic wand question. If you could wave a magic wand and your life would,
be
look
different.
exactly
Right.
how
What
you
would
want
it
be, what would it look
exactly? What
like?
would it be? Yeah.
And people usually think it's going to be these like grand gestures or these big things, and that can be daunting and overwhelming. And
Yeah.
what I have found in all aspects of life and therapeutic process is, the small tangible skills, the small changes you make, whether it's in your daily routine. I always talk about going back to basics. Like, are
Me
you
too.
eating, sleeping, bathing?
Wait, we're like the
Like,
same person.
but
Like
like,
literally.
if you're
Yes,
doing those things, they make a huge difference, and then it's less
absolutely.
overwhelming.
Yes. Routine is everything. And
Hmm.
what I often say, I feel like we probably say the same thing. Your routine can look different, but
Hmm.
the basic skeleton of the routine is the same. But maybe when you're on vacation, you sleep in a little bit more, but you're still sleeping, right?
Yeah.
You're still eating your meals and regularly throughout the day, but maybe the time is a little different. And
Hmm.
that I think is what overwhelms so many people because they're like, oh my God, my routine is completely out the window because I was away. And I'm like, no, actually, if you don't completely change it and you still do the basics, it shouldn't, I don't like the word should, but it shouldn't feel quite
Me
as
either.
overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just like, okay, let's get back to my routine. And
Hmm.
it's not a big overhaul because you've already been doing it, which is
Yeah.
actually where the title of my book came from because I always say that I'm training for life. I'm a runner. And
Hmm.
one day I wasn't training for a race, and people were like, what are you training for? And I said, I'm training for life when life happens. I want to be as physically, emotionally, mentally healthy as I can to be able to tackle whatever is thrown my way. But the idea of that is that, again, like before pregnancy, I feel very like I'm kind of proud to be able to say this. And that I didn't have to change anything. Right. Like I
Hmm.
was already doing the things. Like I was
Yeah.
already, because I was running, I could keep running. And it's this idea that if you're sticking to those basics, even though they're going to look different, there's no reason to completely change it. It might have to be tweaked, of
Tweaked.
course, like
Hmm.
without a doubt, it has to be tweaked to be mindful of what you're going through in life and your surroundings and the
Hmm.
phase of life you're in. But if you're doing those basics, right? And the basics is unfortunately what gets thrown out the window when
Yep.
most people feel really stressed or overwhelmed. And
Absolutely.
that's why we want to say, okay, just do the bare minimum, but still do the basics.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I love that, and thank you for sharing a little background on where your title
Yeah.
came from, which aligns with the other thing I was going to comment on that you mentioned is like people realizing that maybe the things that they were doing before aren't really working for them in this phase of life. And I've noticed that even, we've both talked about being mothers, and we were talking about that before. You know, a lot of your life changes when you become a parent, or
Yeah.
you mentioned the pandemic. A lot, that's an
A lot
example of when life
changed.
happens.
Right.
Like,
Exactly. Right.
and so I also think for people knowing that. you can make these little tweaks, or maybe what you were doing wasn't working, but how can we like draw from that and learn some new skills that are applicable to where you are now, that is also less overwhelming than, oh my gosh, I'm a new parent. I can't go to my 6 a.m. yoga class anymore because I have a newborn. So I'm just not going to work out at all because I don't know what to do, which a lot of us
Right.
do
Right.
because we're
Yeah.
like, how am I going to fit this in? So I
Yeah.
just wanted to highlight that as well.
No, I love that. And that's where a lot of the mindset shifts come in. And like you'll often hear me say, I make it work.
Hmm.
And that phrase I started using actually when I became a new mom
Hmm.
because I needed to get outside and walk. And I remember being like, I'm gonna just make it work. I'm gonna
Yeah.
strap my son on me in the carrier. I live in New York City, and I'm gonna go on a walk, or I'm gonna push the stroller. It's nap time, whatever. Like it's good for all of us to be outside. And that's the tweaks, right? It's about being more
Hmm.
flexible with your thinking. And again, in the book, I talk about developing kind of more of a growth mindset from that fixed
Hmm.
mindset, right? So, like the example you gave would be a fixed mindset, like, I just can't do it anymore.
Hmm.
But a growth mindset would be like, okay, this is what worked for me before. My life looks a little different right now. How can I make it work? Not
Hmm.
starting from scratch, but how can I make it work for me in this new phase of my life? And
Hmm.
it's all back to that mindset of how we think about it. Because we could just be like, it's not going to work. And you
Yeah,
and I both know how much movement and sleep and diet and all these things impact our mental health. That's not going to be
absolutely.
good for us. But if we
Yeah.
could just find 10 minutes to take a walk, hey, that's
Hmm.
better than nothing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you also mentioned stress in that part of your conversation. And so I know that's part of your book, How to Manage Stress. So can you talk about what stress is? I think a lot of people have an idea, but I always like to define terms on this podcast, and
Yeah.
maybe some common misconceptions about stress and what it
Yeah.
is or what it isn't.
So it's funny because I have a whole chapter on stress, and I start the chapter actually with kind of some myth busting. So I don't know if so the most basic definition of stress I like to think about is that it's our body's natural way of dealing with challenges,
Hmm.
right? And when I think of stress, my brain automatically thinks fight or flight,
Hmm.
right? Like the fight or flight, freeze or fawn, but really fight or flight. Like we are in danger. There is a threat. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
And our body physiologically does what it needs to do for survival by either fleeing a situation or fighting.
Hmm.
So that's kind of like what I like to think of it in the most basics, but also because I really talk a lot about the mind body connection.
Hmm.
And stress isn't just mental and it's not just physiological,
Yep.
right? And the important part of stress to remember is that threat or that challenge doesn't have to be a real one for your body
Hmm.
to go into that fight or flight. It could be a perceived threat.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like to set the stage. I like to put that out there.
I love it.
But some of the myths that I bust or the misconceptions that I talk about in my book is that stress is not the same for everybody. We
Hmm.
all might have stressors, but we interpret them and we respond to them differently. And
Yeah.
I always think the pandemic is such a great example of that.
Hmm.
We were all going through a stressor at the exact same time,
Yep.
and we all responded, interpreted, perceived it, reacted very differently. So I think that's important to
Absolutely.
remember. Another one I love busting is that stress is not, or I guess the myth would be stress is always bad for us.
Hmm.
Bust.
Yeah.
Like stress is not always bad for us. A lot of people don't realize there's a good stress that's
Hmm.
called eustress, spelled Eustress. That's the stress that before an exam, before a speaking engagement, before a big job interview, before something, you might stay up a little bit the night before to review your notes a little bit more.
Hmm.
It's motivating, it's inspiring, it feels good, it feels exciting. Although it's stress, it feels good,
Yeah.
as opposed to the quote, bad stress doesn't feel so good. It
Yeah.
feels, more, it feels more impossible, so to say. So those are kind of the main ones that I like to talk about. But again, it's all about how we respond
Hmm.
as opposed to react also.
Hmm. Yeah. No, thank you for busting some of those myths. And I love especially the one about stress isn't always bad because have you ever read The Upside of Stress, that book? Um, I
I
can't
don't know if
remember.
I know the name of it.
Yeah.
I don't remember if I read it or not, but I
Yeah.
do know it.
But it's basically about exactly that, how
Right.
like stress isn't always bad for you. It is a very
Right.
heavy research book for the
Yeah.
audience listening. Um, but yeah, exactly like you said, the test example is one I always give. Like if you're stressed about a test and it motivates you to study, that's actually
That's a good thing.
good stress.
Right.
Wedding day, birth of a baby,
Exactly.
like those
Right.
are happy but
Right.
also very stressful
Right.
events. And like if
And
you're
sorry.
oh no, I was gonna say like the stress of wedding planning is very stressful, but
Exactly.
you feel hopefully good doing it.
Right. Well, and what I was going to say was physiologically, you might still feel that stress response,
Hmm.
right? You might be in that fight or flight. Like, I think many times in our life we get through things and they're like, oh, how did I do that?
Yeah,
Well, that's the fight or flight. That's your
absolutely.
body's natural way of responding to the stress. It's survival and we get through it. But the key is that if we remain in that high stress state for too long, that's when chronic stress happens. That's when we can start developing some illnesses,
Hmm.
related to the stress response, things like that. But these more short-term, happy, exciting, stressful events
Hmm.
are not bad for us,
Yeah.
and I truly believe, again, the mind-body connection, stress, anxiety, it's all telling us something. It's
Oh,
all
absolutely.
information, and it's a matter of what we do with that information.
Hmm. Absolutely. So you just said something about it's how we respond to the stress rather than react. And you've mentioned mindset a couple times already. So how does our mindset play a role in stress?
Yeah. So every situation is neutral, actually, until we interpret it or perceive it.
Hmm.
So I'm going to give an example. Imagine you and I are in traffic right now. We're
Hmm.
in separate cars, or we could even be in the same car, to be honest. But we're in, sure, we're like going for
Yeah.
our drive for coffee or something. Um, Not for coffee, and I'll explain why. But we're just in traffic, okay?
Hmm.
And we're both in the same traffic.
Hmm.
But maybe one of us, I'm not going to say who, because I have a feeling you and I would probably respond the same way. So it wouldn't work. But maybe one of us jumps to, oh my God, I'm going to be late. What am I going to do? And has this reaction that interprets it as this is so stressful.
Hmm.
And the other person is like, oh, look at this. I have some free time. I'm going to listen to a podcast, right?
Hmm.
That's the interpretation of the event. But the
Yeah.
event was neutral until we interpreted it. So now that we have that information, how we interpret it then actually determines what happens next.
Hmm.
So if my thought is, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late for work, what am I going to do? That thought is going to lead to a certain emotion, a certain feeling, which leads to a certain behavior, right? That's the premise of cognitive behavior therapy.
Yeah.
Thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are linked. But if the thought was, oh, look at this, I have some free time. I'm going to call my mom. I'm going to call my friend. I'm going to listen to a podcast, that's going to feel very different. And the
Hmm.
behavior that follows is going to be very different. So we're responding, or rather, one might be a reaction and one might be a response very differently.
Hmm.
So it's the response is so important though, because we can all react out of emotion. I like to think of
Absolutely.
kids when I talk about this, like
Yep.
kids are reactive. They are reacting out of those big
Absolutely.
feelings, right? Oh yeah, I know. You have a little one. Well, we both have little ones, but they are reacting out of emotions and they don't know how to properly respond yet.
Hmm.
As adults, a lot of people also don't know how to respond effectively. And the first jump, the first go to, the first impulsive action is to react many
Hmm.
times. But if we can learn to pause and take a moment and breathe, we are then
Hmm.
able to respond to the situation, right? Like
Hmm.
the immediate reaction might be an impulsive reaction, right? It might be that immediate thought of, oh my God, I'm going to be late. And then
Yeah.
you're like, but what's in my control? There's nothing I can do about it. It is what it is. So let me put on a podcast, right?
Absolutely.
And that's okay. I think that's
Hmm.
something that's really important to have people hear is that we can sit, we can have an unhelpful thought. We can react, but then what do you do after that? Right?
Hmm.
Like it's unrealistic, I think, to think that we're completely going to get out of unhelpful thoughts and
Oh,
not have
yes.
these cognitive distortions or not react out of everything. But you want to maybe react for a moment and then be like, "Whew, okay, this is okay. What's in my control? What can I do about it?" As opposed to sitting in that reaction that turns into a vicious cycle, which turns into spiraling, which turns into nothing good.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. And probably unsurprising to you what I'm about to say, but I talk with my clients about responding versus reacting
Right.
a lot. And I usually give the example of like you get an email that really
That's
frustrates you, and your reaction is you want to respond like,
right, right. Like,
per my previous email, like, like, um,
exactly.
but
But
you
taking
know,
that pause
taking that pause and being like, okay,
is a game
if
changer.
if I do this, what is gonna
Right,
be the outcome? Or
right.
maybe I need to go for a walk and then come back to my computer and see if
Exactly.
I feel the same way. And I completely agree with you. Like those initial reactions, automatic thoughts, like we can learn over time to maybe minimize the
Right.
catastrophization or not
Exactly.
engage them. But there are always going to be times in life our first thought is probably very reactive and not in a positive way.
Right.
And that's
And
okay.
that's okay. Right. I like to say it's what you do with the thought that matters.
Hmm.
So, like, are you going to have the negative thought and then sit in the negative thought and then react to the negative thought and then feel that negative thought and, and it turns into a spiral? Or are you going to have a negative thought and be like, again, like, question what's in my control? What can I do
Yeah.
about it now? And then tweak it to be more realistic, to be more grounded, to be more neutral, right? So it's
Hmm.
really all about the thought. That's going to determine what happens next. And
Yeah.
I mean, yes, you and I are psychologists, and I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that we don't have negative thoughts, right? Like,
Uh,
so, right, exactly. So I always like to say the goal is not to just completely eliminate them. That's impossible and
hmm.
unrealistic and setting us up for failure. But we want to minimize the amount of time or minimize the amount of negative thoughts we have because eventually those thoughts, it's self-talk, eventually it
Yep.
becomes our reality.
Absolutely. So you mentioned pausing. You mentioned taking a deep breath. You mentioned some other things as well, but like what are some other strategies that individuals can use to help manage stress?
Yeah. So you actually mentioned one too that I
Okay.
loved that you mentioned because it's one that I usually mention, which is taking a walk,
Oh,
right?
okay. I
Yeah,
was like, what did I
movement.
mention?
Yeah, yeah. No, movement is a great one. But what I like to do is I like to have everybody think about creating their own coping toolbox. And
Hmm.
again, I have a chapter in my book all about this as well. And then typically what happens is everyone's like, well, what should be in my toolbox? I'm like, great question. We have to figure that out
Yeah.
together. Because if I told you what's in my toolbox and you're not a runner or your go-to person to call is not your mother or your friend, or that's not what you would
Hmm.
do, that's not going to help you. And then you might be
Absolutely.
like, well, she said to do diaphragmatic breathing, but I don't even know how to do diaphragmatic breathing. So now what do I do? Right. So I probably said this on the last podcast too, because some of this hasn't changed in a few
Yeah.
years. But I always like to say that you want to have at least three tools in your toolbox.
Hmm.
And the reason I like at least three is for that reason. Maybe the weather is horrible and you just can't, for whatever reason, get outside and take a walk. Maybe I love to use this example. As I'm about to step on stage doing a speaking engagement, and if I'm feeling really stressed, I can't just go for a run. That's not going to work, right?
Nope.
I know it's a funny one, so I like to use it as an example. So, like a relaxation technique, maybe imagery or breathing exercise would be appropriate at that time. And many times we need to use more than one tool as
Hmm.
well. So it's important to have more than one tool and at least one internal tool that we don't need anybody else or anything else for, like that speaking engagement tool that,
Hmm.
like, okay, I'm just going to take a breather. Nobody knows. Nobody needs to
Yeah.
know. I'm just breathing. It's going to take a moment and I'm good. So there's helpful coping tools and less helpful coping tools. Usually the ones in the less helpful or maladaptive coping tool category typically I say are the drinking alcohol,
Hmm.
drugs, violence, or binge eating.
Hmm.
So, and I like to differentiate the binge eating from emotional eating because it is a very common tool that people eat out of emotion. And that's
Absolutely.
okay. And what I'm going to say is that all of those in the unhealthy ones is if you do them occasionally, like you really enjoy a glass of wine when you're feeling stressed, that's okay. But if it's your only tool, if it's your only coping tool in your toolbox, then it becomes problematic.
Yeah.
But pretty much anything else falls under the healthy or helpful or
Hmm.
adaptive coping toolbox category. That could be crocheting, knitting, calling a friend. It could be cleaning if that's helpful to you, cooking, any of those things, movement. I love saying, any type of movement I think
Yeah.
is helpful as well. Breathing, imagery, meditation, mindfulness. I mean, the list is really endless.
Hmm.
The main question though, whatever you identify as your tool, I always come back with, do you actually see yourself doing that?
Mm.
If the answer is no, do not put it in your toolbox.
Okay. I love
If the
that.
answer is maybe, then this is a really great time to see if it's something that's going to work for you and test it out. So then when you
Hmm.
really need it, you already know what to do. Like if I said diaphragmatic breathing, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I said I was going to do diaphragmatic breathing, but I don't really know what that means. You're not going to start researching it and understand it now.
Yeah.
So you want to practice the tool and then be like, yes, I actually see myself doing that. It may not work in every situation, but if you don't see yourself doing it, get rid of it. Just because I'm a
Hmm.
runner, you don't need to be a runner. That doesn't need to go be your go-to.
Hmm. I love that. And as you were talking, I was like, okay, some of this is coming back from 3 years
I
ago
know.
when we were talking, but the
Right.
the three things in your toolbox. But I think, it's one of those things that we need to hear the same information over and over
Exactly.
and over, and also shows your consistency over the
Yes.
years.
Yes.
Um,
I
but
probably have been saying those three things and at least one internal for 20, like for as long as I've had my degree, to be honest,
yeah.
however long that is. And I'm not going to change it because I still believe that because we
Hmm.
need more than one. One is not always going to work. One is not always going to be available to us. And sometimes we need multiple ones to make it
Hmm.
work.
Yeah. And to add to that, at least in my personal experience, sometimes a coping skill that works for me one day, the same
Doesn't.
stressor comes up a week later and it doesn't work for me in that moment. And so
Right.
I need other
More
skills.
than
Like sometimes I'm like, I need to pause, do deep breathing with no sound. Sometimes I need something more vigorous, like exercise or go for a walk or things like that. And it could be the same stressor.
exactly. And that's why I also like we're talking about it again, because more relevant to the book now is about talking about different phases of our life.
Hmm.
And if something didn't work, like just because, so actually, I actually hope people are listening that listen to the other episode also, because what I want you to do, if you already built your coping toolbox from the last time we talked about this, I actually want you to reassess that coping
Oh, I love
toolbox
that.
and be like, maybe these tools aren't working for me anymore in this phase of my life, right? Maybe a new
Yeah.
mom is listening and they're like, that's not working for me now. Now just moving my body and taking a walk is working. Or playing with your children can be a coping tool, right? I mean, I love coloring with my kids.
Hmm.
Thankfully, they're like, Mommy, color with me. And I'm like, yes, like you have no idea that I need this just as much as you do. And sometimes my husband jokes. He's like, did you guys color because mommy wanted to color? Because like I am full out coloring.
Yeah.
Um, but I would have never thought to color, before my kids.
Hmm.
But that's like, I didn't even realize that's probably a new tool in my toolbox now as I think about reassessing where I am in my life today as opposed
Yeah.
to where I was before.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying of, think of all these different things that you can do. And you didn't explicitly state this, but what I was gathering, it's like it might be things you're already doing that make you feel good. If you're already coloring with your kids and you're like, wow, actually coloring this, I'm going to use a princess because, I know you have a young daughter. Coloring this Elsa picture is actually really therapeutic for me and I feel calm. Okay, that can be a
Exactly.
tool that maybe you didn't seek out, but you realize in the moment, like, oh,
Right.
I
Yeah.
actually feel really relaxed now.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you pointed out that they could be things that we're already doing. Because what I often say is our stress management tools actually are self-care practices also.
Hmm.
So if we're already doing them, or I recommend that we do them regularly, they're actually self-care practices. Then when we need them, we pull from them and they're just serving a different purpose. But if we're
Mhm.
already doing them, we're a pro at them. We're practicing
Mhm.
them to the point that we're a pro. So then we pull from it and boom, right? Maybe it takes one breath as opposed to 10 breaths when you first started
Yeah.
doing it. But also, I have this in the book as well. When I talk about stress, I talk about it like a ladder.
Mm.
Throughout the day, we are taking a step up on that ladder every time
Yeah.
you get that frustrating email, every time something happens. And what we can do throughout the day is create moments for ourselves with these little self-care practices. Like, okay, I'm stressed. I'm going to take a breath. Okay, this happens. I'm going to do this. This happens. I'm going
Mhm.
to do this. So then at the end of the day, when I walk into my family, it's not like I'm up here and the first thing somebody says, I'm like irritable and like
Yeah.
blurting out something I regret. Instead, I've like balanced it, right?
Mhm.
So these tools, I don't want them. Like literally think of them as tools sitting in the toolbox in your shed. I don't want that. I
Yeah.
want them to be tools that you're sharpening and
Mhm.
practicing and you're using on a regular basis. So when you need them, boom, like like, all right, I'm going to color now. All right,
Yeah.
I'm going to use that diaphragmatic breathing. I'm going to go take my walk. And they just stay fresh that way.
Mhm.
And what we're doing is every day, we're actually helping our mental wellness at the same time.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And so, as we've been saying throughout this, the theme of this book is when life happens. Like, and we've talked about some bigger life transitions, becoming parents. You talked about perimenopause, but there's also going to be like, I don't know, just like setbacks throughout the day, smaller things that cause stress that maybe we didn't plan on
Anticipate
because they're
because
anticipate.
life
That's
happens. Because life
exactly.
happens.
So, like, what are some ways like people can help themselves overcome those like maybe personal or professional like setbacks? They're not a huge life shift, but something is setting you back. The snow, we were talking about the snow before, like
Right,
the snow came and you can't do X, Y, and Z. Like, what are some ways that we can like
right.
push through those
So
types of life
yeah,
happens?
and I think that's where the whole mindset comes in.
Hmm.
So it's how we interpret the situations, right? So yes, we had a lot of snow. There was a snow remote day, and I could have thought to myself, like, well, I kind of probably did think this to myself, like, oh my gosh, I have to change my whole day around. I have to cancel appointments, which I did, and then I did it. But instead of like freaking out,
Hmm.
I was like, all right, the fact is, there's a snow day. The fact is,
Hmm.
my son is going to have a remote learning day. The fact is that I have to help him get on to his, remote learning and do these things and be available. What is in my control?
Hmm.
Like, this is out of my control. It is what it is. It's snow, totally out of my control. And this is the situation. It's a fact, right?
Hmm.
So I think that's where we can go and really examine the evidence of our thoughts and
Hmm.
be like, okay, where's the evidence that my day is ruined? Like if that was my thought, where's the evidence? Okay, no, it means I have to shift some things around and I'm gonna make it work. Right. Like I know you
Hmm.
and I talked about that before, like making it work. Like what other choice do we have? But
Yeah.
I think we can look at the way that we talk to ourselves and the thoughts we're using. And then my number one tip when it comes to this is literally focus on what's in your control.
Hmm.
Because when
Absolutely.
stress happens, when life happens, we feel like everything is out of our control.
Yeah.
And if we just take a moment to reground ourselves, could be a breath, could be any of these things, take a pause. It's like, okay, what's in my control? We actually have control over certain things, right? Or
Hmm.
if we're reacting versus responding, what we're doing. But I don't have control over the snow. I don't have
Yeah.
control if they chose a snow day versus a remote learning day. I don't have control over if the nanny can get here or not,
Yeah.
out of my control. What's in my control is the fact. And now that I know this, what can I do with it? So
Hmm.
it all goes back to, again, the mindset, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So I think thinking about that is helpful. And of course, it might sound easy, and I'm gonna,
Hmm.
it is not easy to change
Yeah.
the way that we think and to adapt more of a growth mindset and to be able to do this. But if the one thing we can do is pause and then say, what is in my control? And then give yourself some credit. Like I know
Hmm.
last time we talked about good enough, right?
Hmm.
Give yourself some credit and remind yourself that you're doing the best you can. Like I had to
Hmm.
cancel a lot of appointments that day. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you know what? It happens. It's out of my control. Either people are going to be understanding or they're not, right? Out of my control.
Mm-hmm.
And then to give yourself some self-compassion, right? And some kindness and let go a little bit. Like it's okay. It wasn't a super productive day work-wise for me, but it was productive that I was with my children. I could
Hmm.
connect. I could help them do what they needed to do. That's productive in a different way.
Yeah,
And I think that's important too, because we live in this hustle culture that we go, go,
absolutely.
go. And like, what is productivity? Well,
Hmm.
relaxing and recharging and resetting is super productive.
Absolutely. Oh, and I love all those examples you gave. And one thing I talk with clients a lot about too is like a setback doesn't mean you have to like start over, scrap everything
I'm
you did.
telling you, we,
Like,
we do so similar work. I say the same thing. I love
yeah.
it.
Well, because, I know we focused on the snow day, but I even think of something like, maybe in a job you didn't get a promotion. It doesn't mean you're never going to get it,
Right,
or it doesn't mean like you're doomed for the rest of your life or
right,
you're going to
right.
get fired or things like that. But a lot of times our like
Brain jumps to
reaction,
that.
our
Right,
interpretation is like, oh gosh, I'm horrible. I'm not good enough. Like all of these
exactly.
things. And
Right,
I love how you're really emphasizing like, what is the event? What is my interpretation? What is in my control about it? And um, I think a lot of times when we're high stress, high emotions, like we don't even pause to think of that. It's just like,
no,
snow, panic. I don't know what to do. I have to do this, this, this. I have to get my son on e-learning, and it's
exactly.
just chaos.
Right, right. And that's life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like life is gonna keep lifing,
Yeah,
right? It's gonna keep
absolutely.
happening. And I think the sooner we realize that things are not always gonna go as planned and accept that, and then be like, okay, what can I actually do about this? What's in my
Hmm.
control? The easier it's going to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've been talking a lot about stress. But beyond or broader than stress, there's also burnout. And I know that's something else you talk about in your book. So, can you describe for listeners like what burnout is? Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions around burnout. And then, like, how can we navigate burnout? Are we navigating it the same way as stress?
Yeah. So, when I define, I kind of like to give examples of signals
Hmm.
and signs of what's going on, and or even just examples in general. I like to think of burnout as when just a weekend is not going to be enough to
Okay.
refresh, right?
I love it.
Like you're like, oh, I just got to get through the week. And like, no, guess what? Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday wasn't enough. And you're still feeling depleted, right?
Yeah.
So like if you look at like the gas tank, it is
Hmm.
on empty, right?
Hmm.
And we don't want to get to that point. Like I
Yeah.
like to say that we want to catch it before then.
Yeah.
And it's like if anybody's listening and they're like, oh, but I'm already there, don't worry. There's still
Yeah.
things you could do. You don't have to stay there, but it's helpful to kind of catch it ahead of time. And typically I like to just think of, again, going back to our health behaviors, right? We can kind of check in with ourselves. And I really like that people do this on a regular basis anyways, but kind of like think about how your health behaviors are. How's your
Hmm.
sleep? Are you able to fall asleep pretty quickly? Do you stay asleep? Do you wake up a lot in the middle of the night? How do you feel when you wake up? Do you feel rested? How's your sleep looking lately? Right?
Hmm.
How's your eating? How's your
Yeah.
appetite? Right? Is it more or less the same as usual, or is it more or less? Right?
Yeah.
How's your mood been on most days? Right? How's your movement? How's your stress management? Those types of things. And I like to emphasize the most days because we all have bad days. It's
Hmm.
expected. But if you have more bad days than not, then maybe it's time to seek professional help,
Yeah.
right? But burnout, unfortunately, I think is fueled by a lot of things, including just
Hmm.
unrealistic expectations and societal pressures telling us to do
Hmm.
more, 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 more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's not getting us anywhere good, right? I mean,
No.
I think we're all talking about it, but it's like action has to be made, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's things, again, the things that we were talking about before with stress is so relevant to,
Hmm.
to burnout. And if you're not doing those types of things, like this is the time to do it.
Hmm.
But really burnout is like you're on empty and you feel like you just can't do the things anymore. And I
Hmm.
think a good sign of maybe not quite being there yet, but getting there is also the Sunday scaries.
Mm.
Like everybody has a little bit of the Sunday scaries, so to say. Although I will say since I started working for myself years ago, I don't think I get them anymore.
Okay.
If anything, I enjoy them. I'm like, yes, I get a break from like momming, so to say.
Yeah.
Not really. Like we're always moms, but like send the kids back to school.
Hmm.
Um, but I remember when I was hitting the point of burnout at my hospital job, and I was just dreading Mondays, like absolutely
Hmm.
dreading. Like I did not want the weekend to end, and I was not looking forward to going back to work. And it like I felt like I just was depleted. And I
Hmm.
think those are, again, those are kind of warning signs.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, because we live in a go, go, go society, we don't tend to take the time to check in with ourselves and notice that, which is why I
Hmm.
think a lot of people get to the burnout stage or stage of being burnt out because we can catch it earlier if we
Hmm.
are in tune to ourselves and really understanding the way that our body and our mind is interacting. So, again, going back to the pause, if we're pausing and we're checking in with ourselves and asking
Hmm.
ourselves these questions like, what's working for me, what's not working for me, what do I need right now? Hopefully, you're going to catch it before it gets to that
Hmm.
point.
Yeah. I love that. And I use the term like take inventory of
Love that.
how you're doing, and that's exactly what you described. Because I catch myself doing that. I'm like, I am not sleeping well. Like, what is
Like,
going
what's going
on? And
on?
I'm
What's different?
irritable and what's different. But it is part of like having to be in tune with yourself, which can be a hard practice within
Yeah.
itself, especially you mentioned the go, go, go society. If we are like on autopilot, go, go,
Yes.
go, because we have hustle culture. Many of us have to work one, two more jobs to financially support families. And like there's so many things going on that you mentioned this earlier. We're not doing the basics to care for
Right.
ourselves. We're not pausing to ask ourselves, are we even doing the basics? So I also wanted to just validate to listeners if they're like, okay, that sounds great, but I haven't even
Right.
paused a thought about how I feel in months. It can be hard to
Right.
be in tune with yourself.
It
But
can, yeah. And also if you're somebody that tends to be more anxious, it's
mhm,
also very hard to kind of pause and slow down.
yeah.
And I talk about that in the book actually, that, it's going to feel very different for you
Hmm.
if you're used to go, go, go. And like I'm not telling you to just sit for 20 minutes, but that pause, I often hear this too from people that work multiple jobs or parents. They're like, well, I just can't find time to do it. And this is where micro practices come in. And I
Hmm.
talk about that in the book too. Creating moments throughout the
Hmm.
day, right? Like literally while you're washing your hands, take a moment to breathe. Like
Yes.
smell the soap, feel the soap. While you're cooking dinner, take a moment to breathe. Again, all those little moments, again, that stress ladder, it's
Yeah.
bringing you down a notch. And that's
Hmm.
really important. So I'm not saying like you have to sit for an hour and meditate. I'm
Yeah.
saying create a moment. Like
Hmm.
literally, I sometimes escape to the bathroom. I'm not kidding.
Hmm.
Like I have
Oh
young
yeah.
kids, they still bother me in the bathroom, but maybe they won't. So I would just sit there for a minute and be like, all right, like you just need a break,
I do.
right?
Yep. I
We
think
can
that's like a
all do
mom
that.
thing.
It is a mom thing.
Like,
Although I think it's a dad thing too, and they don't realize it. Like they do it, I think, not thinking that they do it, but they're like,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Um, but no, but we can all create those moments, even
Hmm.
if we don't really have or can find the time, we can create the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we've been talking a lot about stress. You have given so many good tips to navigate stress, coping skills, mindset shifts. I know another part of your book is about building confidence. So, as we're wrapping up towards the end, I wanted to ask you, how can we build confidence, resilience, despite all the challenges that we're going to face when life happens?
Yeah. So, I mean, the basic idea of the book is about resilience, right?
Mhm.
It's about not pushing through necessarily, but rather being able to adapt when life
Mm.
happens, right?
Yeah.
So, if we accept that life is happening, and then we're like, okay, what can I do about this? Right? It's that adaptability, that shifting, that pivoting that's happening. And then the confidence, I have a whole chapter on body image and looking like seeing yourself
Hmm.
through a new lens. And I decided to add that. It was actually an after. It was kind of like the outline was done. And then I was like, wait a minute. Like it makes sense for me because of the work that I do.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a minute, we're talking all about thoughts and how we see the world. Let's now look at ourselves, right? Really turning that inward and how you see yourself differently now that
Mm,
you're seeing the world differently and being able to respond differently. But again, confidence comes to mindset. I mean,
yeah,
if you tell yourself all the time that you can't do something, you're not going to feel very confident. And it's
absolutely.
not necessarily that you should tell yourself that you can do it if you don't think you can,
Yeah.
but it's maybe saying I can't do it yet, or I'm working
Hmm.
towards it. So again, it's about language and the mindset
Hmm.
shift and the words that we use makes a big difference because again, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So we can actually start learning to be more confident. And then we
Hmm.
start believing what we're telling ourselves. And then in essence, we are more confident.
Hmm.
But it really has to start with thinking and about the way that you're already thinking about yourself and what you're saying
Hmm.
to yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to emphasize something you just said there, which is so growth mindset of the adding the yet.
I love adding the
Um,
yet. I love it.
yeah,
It is like
at
it's
the
such a
end.
great hack.
No, it is, but and I caught it, but for listeners that may have not read Growth Mindset, Carol Dweck's book, or are familiar with it, but just adding yet, like I, the first thought that came to my mind because you said you're a runner, like I've ran one marathon ever.
That's great.
I enjoy running. Could I go out and run a marathon today? Absolutely not. Like I'm just
Well,
not in the physical shape. But I if I tell myself, "Oh, I could never run a marathon again," versus
right,
I can't run a marathon yet.
right, right.
It feels different and it feels better.
Exactly. Right. Or even like when I think that, I'm usually like, okay, I can't run a marathon today.
Oh yeah.
But if I wanted to, I can work up to it and I can do it. Right.
Yeah.
Again, that fixed mindset is very limiting. It's all or
Hmm.
nothing, always or never. And the growth mindset is I'm trying my best. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important. And I talk about growth mindset, fixed mindset, Carol Dweck in my book because I think it's so powerful when it comes to mindset to be able to shift that and have more of a growth mindset.
Hmm.
And there's, little things that we can do like adding yet. And eventually, it's actually funny in my client sessions, there's some clients that will be like, I'm not doing, and I'm like, yet, not yet. Like literally, I will be like, not yet.
Yep.
And they're at the point now that they catch it themselves. They'll say it and they're like, I know, not yet. I'm like, well, let's say it.
Yep.
But it's so true because like you are limiting yourself by saying you can't or you're not if
Hmm.
it's something you want to do. Obviously, if it's not something you want to
Yeah.
do, that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rachel, I could talk to you for hours. I mean, we
I
obviously were
know.
chatting before, and then we're like, oh my gosh, we're both on a time crunch. We have to hit record. Um,
I love it.
but is there anything I haven't asked you about that you would like to touch on, something that maybe we touched on and you would like to expand on, as we're wrapping up and before obviously I ask you to plug all your socials and things like that?
Yeah, thank you. I think I just want to emphasize the part of how powerful our thoughts and self-talk can be,
Hmm.
because it really all starts with that thought. And
Yeah,
whatever we're telling ourselves, eventually we believe. So, kind of
absolutely.
like if you get nothing else out of this episode, just to remind yourself to be more mindful
Hmm.
of what you're saying to yourself or what you're thinking to yourself, and and then to focus on what's in your control.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you for those last thoughts. So, the last question I ask all my guests is where can people connect with you and where can people purchase your book? Because this episode is going to release the same week your book releases.
Thank you. So, yes, my book is actually available wherever you like to buy your books. But you can go to whenlifehappensbook.com to see the links of where all of those are. Um, and then I'm on social media as Dr. Rachel NYC. I always like to remind people social media, podcasts, etc., is not therapy. It's not a replacement for therapy, but I love connecting with people.
Hmm.
So I actually even have my email address in my book. And like at certain points throughout the book, I'm like, check in with me. Let me know how this is
Hmm.
going or that. And I love to connect and I can provide resources and referrals if that's necessary, but it is not therapy.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll put the book website as well as your socials in the show notes of this episode. So thank you once again
Awesome.
so much for coming on. It was great like talking to you this way. I know we talk online all the time, but
All the time.
in this format, it was so nice to reconnect after 3 years since your
I
last episode. And
know.
I'm just so happy for you with your book. And just thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule, as we were talking about before we hit record, to come on the podcast and share your knowledge and insights with all the listeners.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, the listeners, for joining for today's episode of Psych Talk. And I will catch you in the next episode. Bye. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Psych Talk. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Don't forget to follow me on all socials at Jessica Lee, PhD, and the podcast at Psych.Talk.Podcast on Instagram.